Hello, and welcome to the SciPhi Show.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I I know some of you were expecting the pre-stream mix, and I do apologise for that being so late today. My wife has been out with her family, and I've had the children indoors, so I've not had the time to get out here. She was hoping to be home a little bit earlier, but you know, life, family, people from overseas, that all sort of takes priority to do thing. But it's really annoying because I really want to have a mix. So what I'm hoping to do is have an additional mix at the end of the stream if there's time. Now, anyway, tonight's stream, what is it about? Well, it's about a topic that, I'll be honest, that I've only skimmed the surface of historically. It's about social constructivism. Now, we've discussed a lot of theories of knowledge recently, and we're sort of going to have a look at it in a different way. This is sort of going out the realms of philosophy and psychology and going into the realm of sociology, although it crosses over with psychology and philosophy, so that's why it keeps it interesting to us. That's a short version of it. We're basically covering off social constructivism tonight, and Dave knows a fair bit about this. And there are a number of issues with the social constructivist point of view, not from most social constructivists, but from people who adhere to social constructivism in a sort of way. I am desperate to have a little bit of a mix, though, so I'm going to get on with things. I haven't even had a chance to load up any tracks or have a think about what I'm going to do tonight. So I've got my, oh look, there you go. That's it. I've loaded a track. I haven't even turned on my sound set, so there we go. So I'm going to get on with that. Hopefully you'll join us for the live stream. It'll probably be in about 15 minutes time, so not much time for tunage, but I need to burn off a little bit of alcohol before we start. Now I need to work out how to switch things over to Plato's Rave. I'm so disorganized today. Hello and welcome to the SciPhi Show. I am Joe.
And I'm not Socrates, but I'm trying.
At least we know that we know nothing.
Yeah, I know less than nothing. That's how much of a genius I am. I not only know that I know nothing, I know that I know less than nothing.
Try and work that one out. So welcome everybody. I apologize that the pre-show mix was a little bit late tonight. As I said in the intro, the wife was out with family that were overseas, and she got back a little bit late, and then I'd set everything up, right? I'd set absolutely everything up so that I could have like click and go start, except I came over here and everything had crashed. So I had to reset the machine, and it was like, and I hadn't eaten. So I was trying to eat whilst having a mix, and it's just, you know what? It's a standard sci-fi show, right? Except instead of the errors being visible to all of you out there, they were just my end. But I figured, like, you know, just in case there's no errors that happen between Dave and me whilst we're live, you guys need to know, because, you know, the errors are part of the sci-fi show, are they not?
If there's no error, it's not a sci-fi show. Also, you mentioned you were eating. Were you eating with chopsticks?
Yes.
I'm impressed.
I learned to use chopsticks from a very young age. My stepdad actually grew up on the Peak in Hong Kong, so if ever he made us a meal, we had to eat it with chopsticks.
I quite like chopsticks. Depending on the food, obviously.
Yes, obviously. But it's always funny whenever I mean, less so because I'm older, but when I was a kid, if there was ever someone of an Asian persuasion saw me using chopsticks, they were like, "White boy, no use chopsticks." Like it was a phenomenon. I remember once actually when I was in secondary school, my friend introduced me to wasabi when he was with his mother. And I was just like, oh yeah, okay, I'll try that. And just ate a whole packet. And the pair of them looked at me like, what's going on? And it's like, yeah, I knew what was coming. And don't get me wrong, it was a lot hotter than I let on, but I knew how hot it was, so I was just playing with them.
Yeah, that's it. Once you're used to wasabi, unless you're doing a Dirty Sanchez and putting it in your eye, you know.
Just like to say hello to the chat. We've got there Lone Wolf, Stacy, Jovial Dane, and Beige. Ben, how you doing, dude? It's been a while since we've seen you on here. Also, ladies and gentlemen, I've been messing with the mic levels recently. I'd like you to inform me if we are sounding overly compressed, either of us, because I've been playing with things and it's really difficult for me to know. But also, one of the things that makes it really difficult is YouTube applies their own sort of normalization and compression and stuff like that after the fact. So even if we sound fine on the live stream, sometimes we sound a bit odd after the fact because if I do the pre-stream mix and it's got the music with the levels all the way up here and then I've got our vocals at the normal levels down here, it normalizes everything and makes the vocals like really quiet. So it might be that actually the pre-stream mix is going to have to be a different stream in the future if this carries on. But hopefully the changes I've made haven't over compressed Dave's and my voice. So yeah, I'm relying on at least one of you out there to know what overly compressed vocals sound like.
I mean, the worst thing is it sounds fine on my end. But of course, once it's going into YouTube, it's a different story.
Exactly. There's so many different layers of processing going on, and I've got layers of processing going on within the software that we use to remove background noise or to remove. If we've got particularly quiet keyboard clicks, it will take it out. If they're loud enough, it will come through. But like I know the pair of us sometimes respond to the chat and we're tapping away, and we don't necessarily want everyone to hear that. And it doesn't matter if I can hear that you're tapping away, but we don't want everyone else out there to hear that sort of thing. So there's so many different layers of things that we've got on crap, basically.
And you don't want the porn I'm watching coming through because we'll get a copyright strike.
Well, exactly. We save that for the private channel. Yeah, you didn't realize we had an OnlyFans, did you? Oh yeah. It's the Fat Boys Watch Porno.
Tubby and Tubbier. What was Miami Vice, Crockett and Tubbs?
I've not watched Miami Vice.
Yeah. Okay, yeah.
I'll take your word for it. Oh, they're reckoning that your input gain could be a little bit higher. Okay, that's interesting because generally I'm told that I'm quieter than you. So I tried to here we go. Look, here's a little bit of a boost. Right, Dave. Oh no, there you go. How about that?
Bookity bookity. No, I better not whisper. I better speak normally. How's that sound?
How's that sound, Ben? Is that okay, or is that overly compressing the Dave?
I could do with a bit of compression looking at my gut.
You and me both, mate.
PK zip that body.
It's all right. We can just superimpose our faces on our bodies from, like 20 years ago. Actually, for me, that wouldn't be that good.
Yeah, see, I was still super slim and could run a mile 20 years ago.
Yeah, no, but to tell you what, though, 2-3 years ago, I look pretty good. So I'll do me 2-3 years ago. We do you 20 years ago, and yeah, there you go. And then we can do our OnlyFans site. So anyway, speaking of OnlyFans in some sort of tenuous link way, we're talking about social constructivism tonight. And OnlyFans is something that could be considered socially constructed.
It is, I guess. I mean, it is, but it's not like the path we're going down tonight. I mean, we can.
But yeah, social constructivism is something that I've really only glossed over in the past, and it's something I am interested in. It's something that, from what I've looked into, I see certain problems with, especially with the way it's applied by some people who don't seem to actually realize they're adhering to social constructivism. But I'll admit that I am largely ignorant of the topic, and tonight we're exploring it further, and thankfully Dave knows a lot about the topic. So
I never said I knew anything about it. I just said, let's do it. I thought, somebody who knew it would jump in. But
Ben, do you want us to send a link to you? You can join out.
Yeah. No, I have studied it, both in philosophy and psychology. Don't worry.
Yeah, no, I know. But as you said, Dave, it's something that largely comes from sociology.
It is, yeah. And there's certain elements of social psychology that use it, and it has philosophical implications and philosophical questions through it. Basically, what it is we've been discussing theories of knowledge recently, and they've all been philosophical theories of knowledge. And this one is from sociology, a sociological theory of knowledge. So it's basically the idea that everything we know and our entire outlook on reality is something that's socially constructed. So knowledge is situated in time, in place, in people, in contexts, that kind of thing.
Is it almost saying that it's not quite so propositional then?
Not particularly. I mean, yes, but so does philosophy say that. It's like not all knowledge. There's knowledge of, knowledge how, knowledge that. It's more, when we think of knowledge, like if I was to say to you now, what is knowledge? You'd probably give something like JTB, coherence theory, that kind of thing. You'd give a philosophical definition.
Or I could be a dick and go, it's just the shit that you know, man.
Yeah, but to some degree, this is kind of what social constructionism is arguing. And it's arguing that knowledge is this, like when you hear people say, you say, what is knowledge? And they'll go, well, knowledge is a body of knowledge. That's kind of what they're referring to. The body of knowledge that exists within the time.
So sort of the external knowledge rather than people who
necessary and sufficient conditions. Yeah. But it does refer to kind of people who hold knowledge as well. It's just that knowledge comes from the society they live in, the context they live in, and that kind of thing.
That makes sense. So it's almost relativistic take on knowledge in a way.
It kind of is, yeah. I mean, if you were to set up a museum of knowledge, you might have phrenology in there. Because at one point, phrenology was considered knowledge. Feeling the bumps on somebody's head was considered to give you knowledge of what kind of personality they are. And it was considered knowledge of how to gain what kind of personality. So that would be in like a museum of knowledge. We wouldn't consider it knowledge, but at the time and in that place and in that social structure, it was classed as knowledge. And people who knew all about it would say they had knowledge.
I mean, we could even still say, even though we wouldn't regard it as knowledge, we could still say that it could be considered knowledge of a thing. It's not knowledge in
the philosophical sense. It's not a justified true belief.
Yeah.
It's just a belief about a particular thing that people happen to refer to as knowledge.
Yeah. So with that sort of thing, it's sort of watering down knowledge, at least from a philosophical point of view, to a point that it sort of goes, well, what separates that from just something that's believed?
Yeah. And that's basically what it is. To bring back a couple of other streams that we did, if you think about Wittgenstein and language games, think of this more like knowledge games.
Right.
You see what I'm getting at?
I do.
Knowledge is situated in the context and how it's used and how it's described. And if you think about art, Wittgenstein's theory of art, where you just point at something and go, that's art, and that's what makes it art. It's the same in this sort of sociological context where that's knowledge, and that's what makes it knowledge, that people considered it to be knowledge. Not that it was knowledge in the philosophical sense.
Yeah. And you can understand why that poses a lot of problems around knowledge. And I suppose from a social constructivist point of view, you could almost have more credence to the sort of knowledge without belief, except it's almost belief without knowledge being knowledge. It's
something like that, yeah. It's a difficult one because there is no demarcation about what makes something knowledge apart from people's belief that it is knowledge or people's acceptance that it is knowledge. It's sort of like if you think about Popper's falsification theory, and that's what sets science apart from pseudoscience. There is nothing like that for this. It's if it's knowledge, then we consider it knowledge, and we look at how it came to be called knowledge, like the processes that made it accepted into society as knowledge, why people consider it knowledge at the time, that kind of thing.
So, I mean, with something like this social constructivist theory of knowledge, I mean, if, let's just say, an entire town decided that they knew that they'd been visited by aliens, that would count as knowledge under this sort of theory.
It would, because, and this is sort of where we get into reality being socially constructed. For that town, the reality is that these people, they accepted it as true. They accept it as knowledge that this particular family in this particular town got abducted by aliens. And in their reality, they know that this couple, so it's knowledge. But from the outside world, from the outside view, it might not be considered knowledge. So in the reality of those outside of the town, there was nobody kidnapped or nobody abducted. But in that town, their view of reality is constructed by the things that they believe they know, the experiences they had. Consider like an epistemic bubble.
Yep.
And in that epistemic bubble, that's what reality is.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the things we've discussed about with cults or what's it called? Not necessarily a cult, but when you've got a siloed unit of people within a community, a siloed community. The word escapes me right now. But say if you had this sort of community of young Earth creationists, and we've discussed before on the rationality point of view, the fact that someone brought up with these particular beliefs and the only information that they could glean just enhances these beliefs. They're rational to accept these beliefs that are held by the majority, even though they are false beliefs, and demonstrably so, but it's not been demonstrated to them. And that is why they're justified at that time. And under a social constructivist theory, we could actually say that a young Earth creationist does actually have knowledge that the Earth is 6,000 years old.
Yeah, because that's the epistemic bubble that they live in. And as far as they're concerned, that's what reality is.
Whereas we'd probably turn around and say that's more of a... I mean, if we're going through JTB theory of knowledge, we go, well, no, that's a JFB, as in a justified false belief.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But because sociology isn't interested in that, it's
not interested in the truth.
Well, it is kind of, but it's interested in how the word's being used, what's being classified, how society comes together to create this body of knowledge, how these individual units come to create, and how the individuals come to create these outlooks on reality.
So is it more, in that regard, using a pragmatic theory of truth? You know, it's useful for the society to accept these things as true, so therefore it's true. So it's JTB, but the T is pragmatic rather than one of the slightly more robust theories of truth.
I guess you could say something like that. Or you could say it's sort of more a form of radical subjectivism.
Mm-hmm.
It's leaning into the idea of relativistic truth. So truth isn't a condition. Truth is just what we call things that we believe are true.
So would that say that there's never anything that's objectively true? It's all relativistically true. It's all
relative to the individual, the society, the bubble they live in, the information they have. So if you think about, to go back to the definition of atheism, because I'm not arguing about that. I'm just using it as an example because it's a good example in the skeptic and atheist community. But how many people claim to know that there's only one definition of atheism? Not just on the theist side, but on the philosophy side as well.
Oh yeah, no, it's one of those issues that it's frustrating, actually, isn't it? When you see it out there, there are so many people that seem to be fighting for one definition of atheism. And I think part of the problem comes when someone goes, no, atheism is only this. And someone turns around, no, atheism is this. And what they mean is, no, atheism is also this other definition. But because someone else has come in strong saying only this, they're saying this. And all of a sudden, you've got people who, at least from the outside, are appearing to claim this thing. And then you're right. It filters down from there. There are people that say, no, it is only one. I know it. I'm an atheist. I've studied atheism or some other bullshit. And they have knowledge over what atheism is.
Yeah, because within that core bubble, it is considered knowledge that there is. And they have all these arguments to support why it's knowledge that there is on the, like, in philosophy, it's been this for thousands of years. You look in a dictionary, a philosophical dictionary, it says this. Read papers, and this is how it's discussed. And in the other camp, the lack of belief camp, they have the etymology. American Atheist says it in there.
A
an
bad
authority.
take on the etymology, though. It's just a translation of the etymology. It's not actually understanding the etymology.
The original use, yeah. But for them, they consider that knowledge.
Yeah, so, as you say, they've got American Atheists, they've got Godless Mum, they've got Aaron Ra, they've got Matt Dillahunty, they've got the Atheist Experience, they've got all of that sort of thing going, this is what it is, everything else is wrong, this is what it is. So, again, there is that epistemic bubble there telling them it is only this.
Yeah, and because they never step out of that epistemic bubble, and because within that epistemic bubble, you have people like Matt Dillahunty saying, all those people are wrong, and you have people like Aaron Ra saying, well, it's only the religious and the antagonistic philosophers that argue this. Everybody else knows that atheism is this. So this is kind of what the social constructionism is looking at, how these people, what is knowledge? If knowledge is just what people call knowledge, well, then this is the framework for discovering what knowledge is. Like you said, it makes it all very relativistic, and is more of a framework theory and more of a descriptive theory than a normative theory.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good way to separate it, actually. But that's sort of how we'd go when we're talking about moral relativism and things like that as well. So, moral relativism definitely descriptively true. Knowledge relativism, sure.
Yeah, that's it. If we're describing how knowledge works in society, then this is an apt description of how knowledge works in society and what people call knowledge and why people say they have knowledge.
Yeah. So, just in case anybody is watching us for the first time, in a general overview way, can you separate what you mean by descriptive and normative, and how that would apply to both knowledge and morality, please, Dave?
Okay, so to give a descriptive account is simply to describe how the world works or how this particular thing works in the real world. So if we're talking about morality seems to be subjective and relative and in some senses normative. In particular societies, it seems to be where there are certain things where it's moral if you believe it's moral, but within each society has its own particular group of morals. But then sometimes those societal morals override the individual morals, and sometimes it doesn't actually make a difference. It's, I think smoking weed is fine. Well, I don't think smoking weed is fine, so I'm going to judge you. Bah, boo, weed, yay, weed, sort of an emotive thing. But under a normative framework, it describes how we ought to do things. So the difference between descriptive is just that it's giving a report of how things work, and normative is kind of describing how things should work or how we ought to be. Does that make sense?
Oh, it definitely does, and hopefully everyone else out there gets that. Another way I've described descriptive and normative in the past is descriptive can describe what people believe to be the case, regardless of what is the case. And normative is sort of what all rational persons would conclude the case is, given the same information, regardless of what other people believe. So something there we could describe as, descriptively, the world is flat, right? Because that's what certain people believe, like the flat earthers. But normatively, it's an oblate spheroid. And that's what...
Yeah, that kind of works. Another good example is if you think about the law. Now, the law is supposed to apply to every individual, so anybody who breaks the law is supposed to suffer the consequences. That's how law is supposed to work normatively. There's these rules that are supposed to be followed, and this is what we ought to do. This is what judges ought to do. This is what cops ought to do. But when we look at it descriptively, we see Boris Johnson getting away with parties at 10 Downing Street.
Yeah, that's a good way. Another way you could think about it is if you're thinking about playing, when you're at school, you're playing a game on the playground, and someone's in goal, and what they ought to do is have a small space around them where they can hold the ball, but they might decide to run that ball further up the field before they drop it and then dribble it in and shoot. So descriptively, you could say what they're doing is that, they're well, as I just described, but what they ought to do is keep it within 6 feet of the goal line. I just used the non-metric system. I feel dirty.
Get out. And there's actually people fighting to have the Imperial System brought back to Britain.
Yeah, that after your Boris Johnson comment, I figured it was relevant, not relative.
Yeah. Well, it's relative too. Some people might not know that.
So I'd also just like to say hello to Steen and Rev, who've just joined us. And in fact, a number of people have joined us out there in La La Land as well. Please feel free to join us in the chat. We love a bit of banter. We love the questions. Don't be afraid. There's nothing to be afraid of. We're a couple of idiots, especially me, because I'm a bit drunk today. Like today's the only time that happens.
Well, this was full when the stream. Well, this was full when the stream started, and it was that much vodka and that much Red Bull.
Oh, so there's only the vodka left now.
Basically, with a hint of color from the Red Bull.
And Steen apparently really needs wine. Now, Steen, this is something that's actually really important. I mean, are you a red or a white drinker? And I mean, what's your subcategory of red and white? It's really important to all of us out here. And if your answer is anything but red, you're definitely wrong. And if you're not into things like your Merlots and Riocas, you're also wrong. Because in this little epistemic bubble here,
I was going to say, is that normatively wrong or
descriptively, completely descriptively? And do you know what? I don't even really care. I'm just being a dick. I mean, to be honest, that is my preference. Though recently, I'm not usually someone who goes for sweet wines, but there was a bottle on offer the other day called a Jammy Red Roux, and it was really nice. Like too sweet, easily down that entire bottle, sort of thing. But it wasn't so sweet that I felt like I was eating Tangfastics. But no, I tend to prefer something a little bit drier than that. And by a little bit, I mean a lot bit. But yeah. Yeah, do you know what? I'm with you there, though, Steen. I like a Malbec. Though sometimes they're almost too vinegary. I say that because I'm a tight ass and I buy cheap wine. And a cheap Malbec is very rarely nice, whereas you can get a cheap Merlot or a cheap Rioja, and it can still be nice. Whereas cheap Malbec, I've not had a good one. I'm not saying there aren't any good ones, but my experience of them isn't. Jovial Dane is also saying that Amarone and Barolo for the win. Thick syrup, excellent. I mean, to be honest, guys, I'm on the cider tonight because I finished the bourbon earlier by mistake, and by mistake I mean I really enjoyed it. And I was like, oh shit, I need something to drink for the stream. It was definitely an accident. And Steen is saying he's a beer man, but he needs wine because his wine shelf is too full. Steen, I mean, if you ever need anyone to help you out with your wine, you know that I'm really good at drinking alcohol. It's about the only talent I have. That and talking cod shit for hours, which is why I'm currently streaming to you all out here right now, because I can drink and chat cod shit for hours. Steen, actually, earlier on today, you said, is there anything I can help you with? I was like, yes, there is. You can supply me your wine. There you go. That's what you can help me with. So, Dave, back to this theory of knowledge. I mean, is social constructivism limited to a theory of knowledge, or does it apply elsewhere?
It sort of applies elsewhere as well. But before we move on to that, let's look at how reality is socially constructed. Like, normally, if you say to a skeptic or an atheist, what is reality? Most of them will say the world as it is, or the universe as it is, or reality is reality, because, tautologies are really meaningful. Or they'll say something like, reality is that which remains once you die, or something, something like that. Reality is that which remains once you stop thinking about it. But if we think about it, really, reality is built up of the many concepts that we hold about the external world that we navigate through. So, if you think about many of the discussions that we have, where we get told we're crypto-theists, or we're Christians pretending to be atheists, or because we're sympathetic to religion, for want of a better term, we're told that we're not proper atheists, because proper atheists are against religion.
They're all anti-theists. A real atheist is anti-theist, even if they're only like a theist.
Yeah. So for those people, the reality as they see it, their reality, is that we are crypto-theists or what have you. And the reality is that for them, is that we have nothing to offer them, or the reality is that philosophy is useless because that's what they've come to know through their experiences and other people and the people they respect. So to say reality is that which remains when we stop thinking about it, that's a fine apt description, but it doesn't really describe what reality is for the subject. And for the subject, reality is the world as it appears to us.
Which, in turn, isn't reality as reality is.
It's filtered through our perceptions, and that's that's what reality is according to this thing. It's our filtered perceptions of the world that we navigate through.
Right, yeah. So, I mean, this comes back to when I was talking about the JTB, but with the T being pragmatic. It's... When we talk about reality, I mean, philosophers for a long time have said that reality isn't exactly what we perceive it to be. Everything is filtered. We don't exactly see what reality is. We just have a slice of reality, if you will. And neuroscience has recently, a couple of months ago, sort of confirmed this to actually be the case. You know, there's more information out there than we actually receive when we're looking at something. So everything we see is completely perceived. So when we're talking about reality, we're talking about a perceived reality. And when we deal with science, we're building these models as if they're objective, based on perceptive reality. And for some reason, most of the time, they work, which would indicate that there actually is an objective reality. Right? There are times when theories should work but don't, and the reason probably is there's part of the picture that we can't see, and the things that we've created to measure the things also can't see because we've created them without knowing that that's there, so therefore we haven't configured them to know that's there. So all of our objective models, perceptively objective models, it's sort of how it is, would indicate that there actually is an objective reality. But neuroscience would indicate, and philosophy would indicate, that all we have is a perceptive reality, especially as a person without all the instruments available to us. Right now, I don't have a headset on. I can literally see, pretty much what you would see in if you were in this seat, or at least we believe so. Maybe different vision levels, maybe slightly different color levels, and all that sort of thing. But much of a muchness, we'd see roughly the same reality. We hope, because we describe it the same way. But even that is another thing. That sort of comes back to the whole qualia thing, doesn't it? We might describe red in the same way, but for all I know, red to me looks like blue to you. It's just the fact that we've been trained that this thing is fiery, and it can represent love and passion and all of that. But actually, if I could see it through your eyes, I'd go, oh no, that's cold. That's blue. That's, So,
well,
sorry.
Here's a good, that color thing is a good example. So let me give you an example using that. If you think about, in this country, red means danger or fiery or passionate, or it represents love. So in our societies, the reality is that red is representative of these various emotions. Now you think about Chinese society. Red doesn't represent stuff like that.
No.
Red represents luck. So for them, the reality is that red is luck.
Yeah, their New Year bags are all little red bags where they get loads of money.
A lot of restaurants have red signs over the top to give them luck for the restaurant and things like that.
Yeah. That's very true. That's very, very true. It's... Unless you see something in nature, generally it is something that is really, really socially constructed. Like in nature, yellow and black is generally something that is dangerous.
Something colorful is something to be avoided because that can stand out from the environment without worrying about being killed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And for humans, I suppose it makes sense why colors like red and yellow could be considered that way because of fire. But the other way round as well. Like there's a lot of benefits to fire and things like that. I'm not sure how, without looking into it, how the link to red being luck came about. But then that's very much due to in England, especially because of Irish ancestry and all of that. Green is considered lucky.
Green is lucky, yeah.
Yeah, and the whole shamrock thing, and leprechauns and all of that. And really, like, other than like the four-leaf clover, why? Did you know, actually?
Yeah, exactly. No,
I've found two four-leaf clovers in my time.
Nice one.
Yeah. The first one I found, one of the leaves actually fell off, and I was so determined that I was not going to let this happen. I went out again that same day. I was like 8, 9 years old, and I looked and I looked and I looked, and I found a second four-leaf clover. And I've worked out, because of this, the reason the four-leaf clover is so rare. Cunts like me pick them. So
lucky.
So from an evolutionary perspective, there's no benefit for the clover to have 4 leaves. If everybody left them, no matter how many leaves they had, they'd have 8 by now. But they've just keep going, let's try 4, let's try 4. I mean, there's no actual conscious thing going on here, but let's try 4. No, back to 3, back to 3.
So yeah, according to this sort of social constructionism, reality isn't actually objective. There is this sense of what we see out there that could be considered objective, but the best we can do with it is a sense of intersubjectivity. So for flat earthers, reality is that the earth is flat, because that's how they see reality. They don't agree with the science, so therefore, for them, the reality is that the science is bunk. Yeah? Because they don't hold the same standards by which to accept information. So for them, the reality is that science is this conspiracy.
So, I mean, from a social constructivist point of view, you can actually have true for you, not true for me. Yeah.
Because truth is just the way we use the word to describe things. Yeah?
Yep.
And for us, the earth is, the Blake spheroid, because science has done the measurements, science has done the tests, we have pictures, which we believe to be real. Flat earthers believe them to be fake. So for them, their reality is that those pictures are fake because it's constructed of all the other beliefs that they have. For us, those pictures are true and there's this meeting of intersubjectivity among those who accept the earth is an oblate spheroid, and an intersubjectivity in the flat earther society. Now, the truth might be that the earth is an oblate spheroid, but if we don't believe it, that's not part of our reality. That's not reality for us.
I don't like it.
No. It gets deeper. It gets deeper as well.
I mean, you can understand how some of these things come about. These true for you, not true for me, and
if you think about that, there's a lot of people who say that might be true for you, but it's not true for me. And we even have atheists and skeptics who say, well, that's true for you. But
Flipside, though, there are some. So one of the great memes, and I know a lot of the time we spend we slagging off memes, right? And that's more because the way people use memes is an endpoint. This is the end of the argument. This settles the argument. And I think that a meme can sort of be very beneficial in creating a point or drawing humor to a point. You know, it can make a point to a situation, but I don't think it can settle anything, at least in a Kaizen sense, you know, 80-20, like at least 80% of the time, if not more. A meme at best just illustrates a single point about a topic. And that's not even talking about whether it does it accurately or not, right? But there is one that talks about the 6 and the 9. I'm sure you've seen this.
Yeah,
one,
I've seen
Dave.
it. Yeah, the parking space.
Exactly. And so when I first saw this meme come out, it had people arguing over whether this number was a 6 or a 9. One person was standing there, one person was standing there. There's this image in the middle. It looks like a 6 to this person. It looks like a 9 to that person. And they're right from their point of view. It looks like a 6 to one and a 9 to another. But I never felt that that was right. And then an addition came to this meme that was saying, well, actually, the person who wrote that number knew in the first place whether that was a 6 or a 9. And I mean, just to elaborate further, not to go along the text that was in this meme because it's not up and I couldn't tell you what it said. But if you had a string of numbers that was 1 to 9 and someone got to the 9 and then there were two people either side of the 9 and one person was arguing it was 6 and the other person was arguing 9, one of them is objectively wrong, right? And you've got all the evidence behind you to understand why that person is objectively wrong. But assuming that 9 was, or 6, was completely siloed, again, there would still be an objectively right answer. Now, that answer could be that the person wrote it in such a way that it was up to someone's perception. That could actually be the answer if there were no other numbers around it and there was no purpose to it. It could just be, actually, it can be a 6 or a 9. Who cares, right? But if we're thinking about numbers and how they ought to be understood in the sort of sequential sense, and a 6 is a 6 and a 9 is a 9, the person who wrote it with that intended. From a social constructivist theory, you're saying that actually it's whoever perceives it a certain way is saying that, yeah, the 6 is the 6 and the 9 is the 9.
Yeah. Because they might not have this information about how to deduce whether it's a 6 or a 9. For them, reality is just what's perceived. And to some degree, for us, reality is basically what we perceive and what we understand. We understand atheism to be a polysemist term. We understand knowledge to be some form of JTB with additional elements. So for us, reality, that is reality. Knowledge is this thing. But think of how many times you've said knowledge is JTB and somebody's turned around and said, no, knowledge is a body of knowledge.
Yeah, or generally that one comes up when you talk about how knowledge is a subset of belief. You say, yeah. And they go, well, no, because there's a body of knowledge. And you go, right, but people believed this thing to put it into this body because it was these things that were believed and shown to be true and so on and so forth.
Yeah, exactly. And now we get to something even more slightly complicated, like you brought up the thing with the meme. Now, there is something that we can point to that is this shared reality and shared perception, and we can sort of make an argument for why it is 9 or why it is 6. Now, what is there in the world that we can point to say that is knowledge?
Philosophy.
But again, that's just
No, I agree. Philosophy.
Philosophy gets it right. I agree. But again, that's our reality as we've constructed it. Yeah.
But
so like I say, for the other people, reality is that knowledge is just these things that we have that we point to and call knowledge. And this overall collection in this huge body of things that we call knowledge. So social constructionism seems to describe that quite accurately.
Fuck off.
Yep. But it does actually help you to understand those kind of things, doesn't it? Yeah.
You can understand why. Again, it comes back to sort of this descriptive line of thinking. And it's one of the things that, I mean, switching it back to morality is, even though I tend to lean towards moral realism, I can turn things back on myself and go, yeah, but they're all descriptive statements too. The
descriptive statements about what we think reality is.
Yeah. And you could say the same about, I mean, you could say that there is no true normativity. You know, you could say everything is descriptive. It's just some are more rigorously descriptive and intersubjectively agreed upon, and therefore you could.
There are certain things that are normative. In some sense, it's still slightly descriptive and it's still slightly intersubjective. But going back to this thing that you mentioned about the number being painted, if you think about Monopoly and the rules of Monopoly, they're normative. They describe how the game is played, but those are how the game ought to be played because the creator of the game deigned for it to be played that way.
Oh, I agree. I completely agree.
Certain people bend the rules and play it slightly different. So you could say you can describe how they play it, but you can say that's not how it ought to be played.
Yeah. And some people might have a similar claim about normative rules, you know, and things as well. They go, well, yeah, but that's just how it's been described. It's one of the things that goes round and round. And I agree with your take on this. It's just I'm trying to address how other people might
you can
see
basically argue that all normative statements are just descriptions of how we think it ought to be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Largely agreed upon descriptive statements.
Yeah. That's it. There's an intersubjectivity going on there as well. And if you think about the Monopoly example, imagine some kid who found the Monopoly board at his grandparents' place, didn't have the instruction book, and him and his friends started playing Monopoly.
Mm-hmm.
There's certain rules that you can kind of gain just from looking at the thing. So they might get a reasonably accurate representation of how Monopoly ought to be played, but they might have different things.
Yeah, no, that's true.
But for them, the reality of how Monopoly should be played is the way they're playing it. And it's not until they come across somebody who's got the manual who says, well, look, that's not how Monopoly is supposed to be played, that their reality starts to change.
I mean, Flipside. I say Flipside. I mean, a continuation of what you're saying there is when I was little, my nana used to play a faster form of Monopoly with me, in the sense that she would actually put some things down. She'd deal out a few of the properties before we started playing, so that the game would be over quicker, because obviously she understood a small child didn't have the patience and the attention span, especially someone with my brain, doesn't have the attention span to say it, but still enjoyed playing the game. So it wasn't until I was older that I was like, what do you mean you don't deal out the cards? My reality was, at that point in time, was that you dealt out the properties at the beginning of it, and then you played the game. I knew no differently.
Yeah. But now we come on to a kind of idea that can be looked at as a bit odd, but the idea that trees aren't real unless we have language to describe them.
No.
Because a tree isn't a tree. Well, if you think about how the world is, there's this object over there that we perceive, but if we have nothing to call it, and knowledge is propositional.
Now, I'll accept chairs aren't real. I'm not accepting trees aren't real now.
Trees aren't real. There's an object, but without the term to describe it, it's not a tree. And we can't know that it has green leaves unless we have the concept of green and the concept of leaves. All we know is that we're perceiving this object. But I think you can have knowledge of trees in the same way that without the concepts to describe it, in the same way that a bee can know that there's nectar or pollen in a flower.
Yeah. No.
It doesn't have to have the concept of pollen. It doesn't have to have the concept of flower to know that if it dips its stinger in this, it'll come out with a bunch of pollen that can then fly back to the hive. And so it takes it a bit far in saying that, reality is completely socially constructed. And that without the concepts and this knowledge, then trees don't exist. All that exists is this object that we interact with.
I mean, that's almost taking it to a point of idealism, isn't it, really?
Yeah. It's sort of, there is a form of idealism that everything that exists out there is mental. And to some degree, you could argue that it is, because us seeing the tree is something that we perceive through our mental activity. We only see the colors because of the way our brains work.
And we know that there are people who have different brains or different eyes that interpret the information differently and see the colors differently.
Yeah.
Largely because of the tones in their eyes, but let's not go down that path.
Yeah. But there does seem to be something out there that, even if we're not seeing it exactly as it is, there is something that we're drawing our experiences from. So I think that to a certain extent, reality is socially constructed and it's subjective. But in another sense, it's intersubjective, and in another sense, subjectivity doesn't come into it at all. Or it does, but only to a certain degree.
Yeah, it's. I suppose to an extent it is hard to draw that line, isn't it? Really, between
it is. Where's the demarcation between when it's objective and when it's subjective? Because if the tree gets its color from our subjective experience, does that mean that it's objectively green? Well, most people would argue that it is, because it doesn't matter whether you perceive it to be purple. The light waves should be hitting your eye in such a way that if your faculties were working normally, it would be perceived as green.
But that's the point. It's the bit before our perceptions that make it objectively so, isn't it? It's, as you mentioned there, the light waves that would be consistent. You and I might see green completely differently. We may think we're seeing it the same. I look at that plant behind you, and depending on the shape of it, it goes from sort of a medium green to a dark green, and you can probably look behind you and say, yes, that's the case. But we don't know whether we're actually seeing the same green. However, we are seeing the same light waves, and if we had a way between us right now to shine that, we'd get the same reading. even if our experience is different. And that's the bit that we'd regard as objective, that would indicate that there is some form of objective reality.
Yeah. But what could be argued here then is that those things might be objective reality. Those things, our personal opinions, don't count. But the frequency of the light wave is socially constructed because we've socially constructed the numbers, we've socially constructed terms to describe it, we've socially constructed things like frequency, wave, to describe these things. So our knowledge about those things is socially constructed, and it depends on us situating ourselves in those language games as to whether we accept that as reality or not.
This sounds like subjectivity of the gaps again.
Kind of, but not. Because it's not describing that kind of thing. It's basically just describing how we acquire knowledge, how we describe knowledge. And if all those things depend on us constructing ways of describing them, then our knowledge about it is socially constructed. The thing that we're describing isn't socially constructed, but our descriptions of it, our understanding of it, everything like that is socially constructed. Science itself, you could argue, is a social construction filled with social constructions aimed to get at that layer of non-socially constructed.
So how would social constructivism view things like the rules of logic and numbers and stuff like that?
They'd be socially constructed because they're descriptive of certain ways of thinking, and normativity is something that's kind of socially constructed. Yes, A equals A, and that exists in the real world, but that's a description of how we seem to see the real world. In the real world, A might be A, but, that's just how it is, not knowledge of it.
Interesting. And what about someone that disagreed with A equals A under social constructivism?
Well, for them, reality wouldn't be that A equals A. And we've even come across people who say A does not equal A, because things are always in flux and things are always changing. So A can never equal A, because by the time you've expressed that sentiment, A has changed into B.
Indeed, but that sort of misses the point of what A equals A is actually
it does,
getting at.
But for them, the reality is that A does not equal A.
Yeah, no, and I understand where they're coming from. I just, I'm just want to reiterate the point, John, that you're missing the point.
That is missing the point, yeah.
And that, yeah. Especially when you're talking about a specific thing, like this is a cider can. It doesn't matter whether there's cider in it or not anymore. It was still a cider can, and it doesn't matter that in 100 years it'll be this crushed up, melted down thing that is somewhere on, I don't know, whatever it's been turned into or buried under or anything like that. At this point in time, this is a cider can, but for that person, they would say, no, that cider can is not a cider can. And then they turn around and go, no, I'm not saying that. You go, there's just, a molecular difference between that and a moment ago. Right.
Yeah. I mean, I am me. I can't not be me.
Yeah.
I can't be Joe.
Yeah.
You
probably can be.
A.
You can log on to my
I'm not smart
YouTube
enough.
account.
Yeah, I'm not smart enough.
Shut up, Dave.
Okay. So now we have an understanding of kind of what social constructionism is when it comes to how we look at reality and what reality is for us. Now there's another sense. Oops, sorry.
Sorry, Kimmo said, just write your numbers in Braille. Problem solved. Braille porn, the best porn. You really feel it.
Okay, but what if, for some small tribe, the bumps in the Braille for 6 actually mean, watch out, there's a tiger over there?
Then you're fucked, but not in the way you'd hoped.
Yeah. So the reality is that Braille number doesn't mean that. It only means that because of this social construction we hold in our head.
So Steen is saying a truth needs an external verifier.
But that's a social construction of what we believe to be truth.
And I think I'd turn around and say something that is true doesn't necessarily need any external verifier for it to be true. It just needs the external verifier to verify that it's true.
For us to know it's true. Yeah.
Like, before we could verify the world was an oblate spheroid, it didn't stop it being an oblate spheroid, right? Once we verified it, yes, okay, we knew it was true. But before that, it wasn't a different shape. But he says, if not, it's just an opinion. And I'd agree from a human point of view, right? If we're having a discussion about the shape of the Earth before we could verify the shape of the Earth, then it is opinions. And perhaps we can turn around and have a few experiments, like this slit experiment where you've got the two lights and you stand far enough away each other and you see the light at the different angles. You could say, well, this would indicate that the Earth was not flat. But you couldn't completely verify it. You could always have an argument, well, yeah, there's just a bit of hill going down there. It doesn't stop the truth being true. It's an oblate spheroid. It just stops people being able to say, at least from a philosophical point of view, that we know that it's an oblate spheroid. From a social constructivist point of view, you could say one way or another, which is one of the problems that we're talking about with social constructivism. It's not necessarily just an opinion. It's just an opinion between us humans. But there should still be some form of objective truth there. He also says humans are the only animals that can argue that topic. As far as we know, how do you know that the apes are not sitting there arguing between themselves? They might be. Right?
And how do you know that dolphins aren't arguing about where to find the best seals?
Lone Wolf says, this sounds like sociological solipsism. It does. To a degree it does, though, doesn't it?
Yeah, to a degree. Yes and no. But it's not arguing that your reality is the only reality, just that your reality is socially constructed.
Yeah.
Carry on.
No.
I was just going to say, speaking of planets, is Pluto a planet?
Yes.
Okay, but Neil deGrasse Tyson in Science says that it's not a planet.
Yeah, but he doesn't know what he's talking about.
Yeah. In the mid-1900s, was it a planet?
Yes. No, I know it's not considered a planet anymore. I was just being a dick. But yeah,
So
one of the things that frustrates me, actually, is they call it a dwarf planet, but a dwarf planet is not a type of planet. Well, why is the word planet in it? Right? If a dwarf planet is not a planet, surely it should just be a dwarf cluster or a dwarf mound or whatever. But yeah, if a dwarf planet is not a type of planet, then why is the word planet in it? They should plan it better.
Yeah, exactly. Planet. So yeah, that seems to indicate that there are certain things about objective reality that are socially constructed.
I definitely agree. There is a certain level of social constructivism that goes on. I mean, you could say that about language, couldn't you? It's something that is purely
It's all socially
descriptive.
constructed.
Yeah,
Descriptive. It's how we describe and create our reality. I think it was Wittgenstein that said it, but
probably
the limits of our reality is our language, and that's kind of what he's hinting at.
And I would agree that language is a big hindrance to us. I mean, if we could actually agree on a normative language, one language for the entire planet, and this word means this thing in this context, and it would always mean that thing, right? I know we have a preference over our definition of atheism and things like that, but if language was normative rather than descriptive, and there was just one definition of atheism, whether it was non-theism or whether it was the way we see atheism as, the belief gods don't exist, we wouldn't have that issue of the semantic debate about what atheism means or what it ought to mean, because actually we've got it all there laid out for us. And you might have slang on the bottom of it, but generally with all communication, it would all be normative rather than being descriptive, and you wouldn't have these issues between American English and English and French English and all that sort of thing going on. It would make communication easier. It would break down that English language barrier that I've talked about before. It might take some of the joy out of language. It might take some of the joy out of being able to pun and be ambiguous and all that sort of thing. But I'm sure we'd be able to fill that joy in other ways. So a few more comments. Martain says, wouldn't all animals that communicate be in some way arguing the nature of reality, even if it's the proposition, look out, predator, or hey, let's procreate? Interesting. You could be right there that they would be at least describing part of their reality. Unfortunately, it's really hard for us to digest the way animals really see things. All we can do is anthropomorphize this sort of thing and go, well, when we see a human doing this sort of thing, we know that they're trying to look to mate, or we know that they're kind of scared of this thing, or we know that we're warning others. We don't really know if that's actually what's going on with said animals.
We're constructing their reality based on our reality.
Exactly. So it's meta-constructivism.
Yeah.
And that's bad, okay? But yeah, I like the idea. Luke says, hey, losers. Shut up, Monday boy. I'm clearly a loser because that's the best I could come up with. Because actually, Luke, your stream on Monday was really good. And
just because you get more viewers than us doesn't mean you're better than us.
Yeah, and just because you're prettier than us doesn't mean that you're better looking. Wait, yes.
I've got bigger boobs. That makes me more attractive.
And I have a smaller penis. Wait, no, that doesn't work either. Shit. I'm really bad at this dissing thing. Luke reckons that social constructivism is chasing a carrot. Okay, but would you rather I was beating you with a stick, Luke? And I know the answers to that one, darling.
So basically, social constructionism is Bugs Bunny?
He reckons it's only good as a metaphor.
To some degree, I agree with him. Okay, but
to a large degree, I'd say
I wouldn't go that far. But to some degree, I do agree. But there is certainly a lot of elements of truth within it. It's like anything else. It's grabbing hold of an elephant's tail to describe the elephant.
And
saying an elephant feels like a wiry, hairy thing. Whereas, in fact, if we look at knowledge as philosophical and as, in the sense, we get a better picture of what knowledge is.
I'd agree with you there. I mean, it's even within philosophical theories of knowledge, we'd say that each individual one doesn't really do knowledge justice on itself.
Yeah, because there's even the theory of relative knowledge. There's, epistemic relativity, and that is something like social constructionism to some degree. And that seems to be the case descriptively. Like when you think about Wittgenstein's language games, it's like a framework within to look at these things, and it seems to describe how language works. I mean, sure, there's some problems with it, I guess. But then isn't there problems with any kind of framework attempting to describe such a big project?
Yeah, and until you can find some way to actually prove any of the frameworks. Yeah.
yeah.
And I mean, that's the thing. It's one of the things that I think I really actually enjoy about philosophy is it puts these frameworks out there and whittles away at them, and you're left with a few of the best ones. And they sort of all describe different sides of the same sort of thing, but none of them necessarily describe the whole thing. And when it works well with something like science, you can sometimes find out actually it's these two sides. These two sides interconnected together do actually work. At the moment, there are certain things that we can't answer. There are certain things we can't answer. We've just got our best approximation. These are the best 4 or 5 theories of knowledge that are out there right now. And I don't even know if we can really ever use science to turn around and say, no, this is what knowledge is. The closest we have to scientific knowledge is fallibilism.
Yeah. Okay, so now that we have that kind of understanding of social constructionism and what it says about how our realities are socially constructed, there's another element to it. Okay, and this one sort of resembles determinism, but it's not just the ideas that our realities are socially constructed in how we perceive them, but in how we perceive ourselves and how we are created. It sort of links up to David Hume's theory of the self, where it's just a bundle of perceptions and a bundle of experiences and a history. And if you think about John Locke, the self is the ongoing pattern of memories and experiences and that kind of thing. So if we think about somebody who's in a wheelchair, now if you think about them being in a wheelchair in a society that doesn't cater to anybody except the most physically fit. So every shop you have to walk up 5 flights of stairs to get to. All the buses you have to climb a ladder to get into. Those people in the wheelchair are going to see themselves as kind of useless and unable to navigate society.
Yep.
Whereas in a society that actually kind of caters for them and has normal sized buses, has ramps to get into the buses, has home shopping, has ramps to get into public toilets, has disabled toilets, all that kind of thing, they're going to see themselves in a very different way. They're going to see themselves as somebody who can navigate society without too much of a problem. So to that degree, parts of ourself are socially constructed.
Bloody socially constructed bullshit.
Yep. But it's true.
No, it's true.
Yeah.
I'd agree with you. I mean, you see a hell of a lot of that. I mean, we could turn this round to consider when things in society were a lot more religious, and homosexuals were struggling with coming out in a Christian society, for example, and they were thought of as unclean and spawns of the devil,
perverted, deviant,
that sort of thing. And a lot of them would see themselves that way. And you see this, especially in America, where they are still so very religious. There's a lot of closeted case people that hate themselves, and they speak out so vehemently against homosexuals and homosexuality in general, and then get found in the back room with, I don't know, cabin boys, bus boys, whatever. They always get found out in some sort of scandal, and it's because they hate themselves because of that level of social constructivism. Because of how
society has made them, yeah. And now, let's think of somebody like Aaron Ra, okay? And we've made, unfortunately, but he's a good example of this. Think of how often we've said Aaron Ra has dug himself into a hole regarding his stance on atheism and regarding the things he said about how words work and how atheism works, and his whole skeptic image. He's constructed this image for other people, so other people have this knowledge of him. But he's also constructed this image which now makes him have to be that way, and he can't change his mind on anything. So all the elements of these arguments that he's making now, and this doubling down and looking like a bit of an idiot, is socially constructed. He's constructed a reality for himself that he can now not break free from.
Wanker.
Yeah. But he's also constructed how other people know him.
He has, yeah. And other people have done that by extension too. They have raised him higher and higher on their proverbial pedestals, and because of the image he's put out of himself and the way people have taken that and accentuated certain characteristics and fed it back to him, he's now at a performative status of him. Aaron Ra is now the caricature of Aaron Ra.
He is now what other people have made him to be, as well as himself. And there's a sort of feedback loop that kind of goes on that constructs him, and then he constructs how people perceive him, and then that constructs how he is and how he displays to other people, and that all becomes him.
And if you were to turn around and go, actually, no, I was really wrong about this. I've spent some time looking into the logic and epistemology and X, Y, Z, and actually, I was wrong about this topic. It'd probably have a lot of people turn around and go, "Oh, you're not Aaron Ra."
Yeah,
your account's been hacked.
Yeah, that's it. It'd be something like that, because for them, their reality is that Aaron Ra is this pirate dressing motherfucker who acts like an arrogant prick. No offense,
No offense. Yeah, that makes everything okay. That makes everything okay, Dave.
Well, socially constructed, it does.
Yeah. So Ben says, serious reflection. Social constructivism is one of those incredibly important concepts to understand in manifesting humanity humility and charitability, but ought not to undermine striving for objective regardless. And I think I'd agree with you there.
Yeah, I agree. That's how I see it. It can help us to understand why people think certain things are knowledge, or why it's considered knowledge, or how they got to that position. But I don't think it paints a clear enough picture of what knowledge is. It can certainly help us to understand how things get to be knowledge, get to be considered knowledge, how people see certain things, how people see themselves, but I don't think it paints a full enough picture.
I think about morality in the same way as well. I think that, like when people are making descriptive statements about morality, I can understand where they're coming from. I just don't think they're taking in the full spectrum of, the morality and the various moral theories and the whole thing. In general, I think people can rationally disagree with my position, and they may be correct. They may be. I could be completely wrong in my realistic stance. But generally, when people are disagreeing with realism, they're doing it in a very descriptive way where they're not really addressing all of morality. They're just taking this tiny slice and going, because of this thing here, duh. And I think feeding that back into social constructivism, it's the same sort of thing. It's
yeah, absolutely.
There is a lot of our reality that is socially constructed. Yep, but that's not the whole part. There's still something beyond that. But yeah, Ben, I agree with you. There you go. Say something I disagree with for once.
Ben thinks morals are subjective.
No, he doesn't. He's not that dumb. The Icarus does, so
Did you just in a roundabout way call Icarus dumb?
Well, yeah. I thought that was quite obvious, but
Okay.
I don't actually think Icarus is, but I wanted a way to throw out an insult because I'm a cunt. Apparently, there was some nice wordplay going on.
That was Planet.
Oh, Planet, right, wicked. Lone Wolf says the English language is a big hindrance, and he agrees. And yeah, it can be. I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to be the English language. I think language in general can be. But if we were
what
all
do you
speaking...
think they came up with propositional logic?
Exactly.
To remove that element of language, yeah.
Yeah. And then people turn around and go, yeah, well, it's not about that. It's about the belief. Fuck off. Icarus says, we can't agree on words in English. How can we agree on a single language? Yes, no, I'm with you. We'll never agree on that. I'm just pie in the sky thinking sort of thing. If there was a single language and normative use of that language and everybody understand what the normative use of that language was, then I think that we would get... Oh, sorry.
It's usually me that does that.
Yeah. Then I think that we would actually get to that point where we were understanding each other better and communicating more effectively. I don't think it will ever happen, especially not in any of our lifetimes. Steen says social constructivism is making me angry, or maybe it's still I don't have wine. Steen, honestly, where's your wine? Like you said, you've got this massive shelf of wine, more than a shelf. He used words I can't remember right now. What was the word, Dave?
Wine?
Rack. He had a massive wine rack. Yeah.
That describes boobies, though.
Yeah, was he talking about his wife? His wife has a massive rack, and she was supposed to go out and get wine. Maybe that was the case. Steen, Send pictures to my DM.
Steam has now blocked us.
Luke also says, it makes me angry too. I did training in it for family therapy, and the guy asked if anyone disagreed, and I was the only one that put my hand up. Luke, I'm sorry. I mean, I think you probably disagree with this topic more than both Dave and I do, but it's one of those things I was talking about in our group the other day, and this is talking about religion and stuff like that. So the Answers in Reason group, and one of our members posted something about religious people being too credulous, and I raised the point that he was using his very subjective and biased experience of people in his area, and he's forgetting that people in general, especially kids, tend to be incredibly credulous and that sort of thing. And so whilst I agreed with him that some religious people, especially the people he deals with regularly, can be quite credulous, it's not necessarily the problem or the reasoning he perceives it to be on a macro scale. And I feel like your problem with social constructivism might be how you deal with it on a regular basis. You know, it might not be on a macro scale of social constructivism. It's the way you deal with it and the problems it creates for you in your line of work that make it a much bigger problem than it is. And we could argue that anyone in any form of scientific field might feel a similar way as you do. And I could understand why. And I'd probably lean quite heavily to your direction. It's just also important to remember that our biases are there. So I'm just chucking that one out there.
I'm probably kind of luckier than Luke when it comes to this, because I learned social construction during the psychology part of my degree, but I also learned it through the philosophical, through the philosophy and how philosophy looks at it and how it relates to like determinism and things like that. So my view is less on the psychology side and more on how it is philosophically.
And my view is completely ignorant when it comes to this. You know?
Yeah, that's my view too, because I do philosophy, and philosophy is ignorant and just made up bullshit.
Oh, hey, Claire, I just seen that you popped in about 20 minutes ago, but that's how far I'm back with the chat. You know, I do apologize. But Claire, how you doing? Hopefully your stream's gone well. Hopefully you've rounded off things with the old trial. Very curious to how it's actually all ended up, even though in general, it's not something that is massively of a concern to me. I think the concept is more important to it. And I actually really like Johnny Depp. I do. And I really hope that the things that have been said about him are not true. I don't like how high profile it is just because they're famous people. You know, it's the fact that this sort of thing wouldn't be dealt with in this way for normal people, for like you and me, you know? So I suppose I've got a little bit of anger towards it at the same time of supporting him and drawn me away. But I am curious to how the whole thing has ended up. And from the clips I've seen and from some of your streams that I've watched and some of the analysis and all of that, it seems like things should rule in favor of him. And she's way more of a fucktard than I ever realized. It's either that or she has a really, really, really bad legal department and is just fucked. But yes, anyway, I don't want to get onto that right now. Lone Wolf says, well, if we do all the things that Dave says, then we only get a good picture of what our society tells us that knowledge is. But is that really what knowledge is? And I think that's a big part of the question. And I think that's the difference between social constructivism and philosophical takes on knowledge.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, to some degree, that's what knowledge is. Knowledge is the things that we call knowledge. But is there necessary and sufficient conditions that make something knowledge outside of us describing it as knowledge? And for me, that's where the interesting question is, of course, because, being into philosophy and whatnot, that's the interesting part of the question. Okay, people called the Earth flat 5,000 years ago, and it was knowledge then that the Earth was flat. But that doesn't tell me whether knowing the Earth is flat or believing the Earth is flat is actually knowledge.
Yeah, it almost seems to just equate knowledge with belief from a social constructivist point of view. And at which point, what's the difference between the two?
Yeah, exactly. Let's use the Amber Heard Johnny Depp trial as an example. Now, you've just said, according from what you can gather from the trial and what's been said, Amber Heard is worse than you think. So you have this kind of sense of socially constructed knowledge about these things. And there's a lot of people that might agree that that these things about the trial, and that Amber Heard is a bit of a psychopath, and et cetera, et cetera. So we can call it knowledge, but do you actually have knowledge of what Amber Heard is like, or do you just have knowledge of the way it's presented? Yeah.
Yeah, I totally go, no, I've got knowledge of the perception.
Yeah, that's it. But for many people, they now have what they would call knowledge. And if this thing is correct and knowledge is just what we point to and say that is knowledge, well, then you have knowledge. But like you said, that doesn't seem to determine whether something is knowledge or just something that we describe as knowledge. And for me, like I said, the interesting question is whether it is knowledge and what makes something knowledge beyond us pointing at it. Like the question of what makes something art. Yes, art is what we point to and call art, but what is art? What is high art? What makes us point to it and call it art?
If I point to my eyebrow right now and say that is art, would anyone else agree?
Yeah, that's it. Or, people can point to their children's pictures magneted on the fridge and go, that's art. Okay, yeah, that's art as you call it. But is it art?
Yeah. Yeah. Slightly different inflection.
An inflection, yeah, exactly.
Agree with you. Ben says Aaron Ra's a crypto theist. Do you know the way Aaron Ra and Matt Dillahunty have been going on in the last year or so, and with how irrational and terrible they make the rest of us atheists look? I could completely believe you. They are like parodies of their former selves. And yeah, maybe the pair of them have just been hacked, and that's what they're just posed now. Dave says, as in Lone Wolf says, propositional logic is worse than the English language.
It is if you're trying to order a pizza.
Could you try and imagine actually ordering a pizza using just pure symbology?
You could if other people knew what the symbols meant.
Yeah, well, exactly. Just they don't know, though.
Technically speaking, the words and the utterances are just symbols.
Yeah, APSG. What?
Yeah.
What? You know what I mean. No, I really don't, sir. Yeah, you do. It better be at my house in half an hour. Where do you live? Oh, yeah, P2. What?
Yeah.
But yes, when you're discussing propositions, no, it's not Lone Wolf, but
especially if you're making arguments surrounding those propositions, because it takes out how we interpret what the words mean and just boils it down to the most common elements.
Hello, Crisis. Nice to see you as well. Been a while. Glad you're here. And apparently we're whack now. It's not whack. We're drunk. There's a difference. Kimmo says, talking of reality in a social context, I noted Joseph Raz died on May the 2nd. His principles of authority as related to personal autonomy and social forms are extremely astute in my opinion. I've got no clue who Joseph Raz is. Do you, Dave?
No, unfortunately not. Sorry.
Kimmo, when are you actually going to come on our stream with us? Because you seem to have far more knowledge than the pair of us. I think you should come on and host a couple of streams, even if it's like once a month, right? Where you actually teach us all of this shit. And the pair of us spend our time trying to distract you from what you're saying. Because people might actually learn something. Genuine invite though, and genuine challenge to deal with the pair of us distracting you the whole way. Dean says, "How is medicine social constructivism? How do those merge? Regardless of we use our constructed reality of drugs, they work also on those that have a different construct."
This is why I think social constructionism can take it that little bit too far, because to say, like I use this example in my dissertation on value, how people believing that a rock is going to cure a headache, that might have value to them as in personal value, but it doesn't actually have value in curing a headache. So for them, they've socially constructed this idea that this rock is going to cure their headache. Sometimes it doesn't work. Well, maybe that's because they stiffed their neighbor out of 10 cents 20 years ago. They come up with an excuse to protect that social construction. But there is this element of reality that isn't socially constructed. It's what constructs us, like I said, with the disabilities and stuff. So I think in some cases, it goes that little bit too far.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and that would sort of answer, the bit where people have a different construct as well.
Yeah.
So
they haven't had access to the reality that constructs that self. They've only constructed reality from their selves, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it definitely does. Ben says, Dave and Joe, if you're getting paid for this crypto theist shilling, can you get me in on the deal? Got to make those fat stacks. If I was getting paid, do you really think I'd live in a bungalow? I mean, yeah. The closest I get to getting paid is not. Yeah.
If I was getting paid for it, I wouldn't be drinking Coke. I'd be doing lines of it.
But yeah, I mean, to be honest, like with the way my finances are going right now, if anyone wants me to do any crypto theist shit, I might be willing to, bend my general morality. I don't know if I actually could. Like, I don't. Depends how much you're going to pay me. Yeah, you drop $1 million on me, I'd probably say anything. I'll be honest with you that far, right?
Okay, Trump.
But that's just because I could move away and start a new stream.
Wearing a mask and
the SciPhi show. I could shave. No one would recognize me. I'm going bald as it is, I'll just shave my head, shave my face. There you go. Wife would probably leave me because she likes the beard. But but yes, serious note, if anyone does want to pay me to shill, hit me up. Kimo says, I don't have nearly the philosophical chops you fellas do. I'm just drunk with a good dictionary and the internet. I mean, you might be talking about Dave there. I don't have the philosophical chops, and I don't have a good dictionary. I mean, I do have the internet, but I'm far too distracted to use it. All I have is being drunk. So you're definitely one-upping me, Kimo. Oh, Steen found a hole. Is your wife aware that you're announcing this sort of thing? Because honestly, Steen, I'm not sure my wife would be happy. He says, weren't we talking OnlyFans in the beginning? We definitely were, but I didn't realize your wife was up for it as well. But yeah, let's do it, right? We'll do fingers and elbows. That'll be our thing. The grainy bits of skin.
Yeah, the fact that OnlyFans has fans in the title infers that we could never use that service because fans.
I think you need to have boobs to have fans, don't you?
I've got boobs, but no fans.
Oh, so I'm wrong. There you go. Proposition proven false. So social constructivism. Only fans. That's socially constructed, isn't it?
It is. And the idea that we need to stare at women's boobs and pay them for it is also kind of socially constructed.
It is, especially when you can have women in your bedroom do that for you.
And pay them.
Or not. You can not pay them.
No, that's a lie.
I mean, no, that's true. It is a lie. You pay them in one way or another. It's just you might not pay them directly with money, but there's always a payment. Oh no, has Emma ripped out your router? She might have. Oh dear, Emma, I'm sorry. You're lovely and you have nice boobs. You back, Dave?
Am I back? Yeah.
You should watch that bit back tomorrow. That was brilliant.
I will. I missed it all for in my life.
Yeah, no, I'm not even going to spoil it for you. But tell Emma I'm sorry.
I'll set my sister on you. She's pretty tough.
She's quite pretty as well.
And she can drive.
Nice. Although, to be fair, my wife would be a bit annoyed if your sister turned up.
And my sister would be too.
What did you just tune into, Randolph? We're discussing social constructivism, but Dave and I are a bit drunk, so we've gone off on many tangents. And I'm not sure the original point that we were trying to make there, but Steen's wife is going to be doing an OnlyFans for Answers in Reason. Is the end of it. Also, if anybody would be so kind as to record themselves dancing or doing something silly in front of a green screen that I can put on the pre-stream mixes, I'd fucking love it. Honestly, I would. If you don't have a green screen, get Snapcam. It's got a emulated green screen, and just do something stupid in front of it. Even this, right? Move a bit further back so you're not so cut off and it doesn't look awful. Because I'd love to have all of you out there on our pre-stream mix. It would just make me happy. The longer the video, the better as well. Because if I could have like a loop of you doing some amazing things. I mean, right now I've got, Jesus getting jiggy with a blonde in a short red dress, and I've got Thanos dancing and bumming some other girl and all of that sort of stuff. So, I mean, get yourselves involved. As long as you're not doing anything outside of the, YouTube and Twitch terms of service, I'm happy. And if you are, you can send it to me personally and I'll watch it and let you know how excited I got. But it might not appear on the stream. So, Dave, to bring things back to social constructivism, if we consider that as a theory of knowledge, it really, really seems to not describe the whole picture.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's like you said, people arguing that morality is subjective because they look around the world and see that this is how it works, but that might not be the whole picture of morality. Or they describe morality based on their experience of the world. So it doesn't paint the whole picture. It is, I think Ben made an excellent point earlier in that it can help to teach us epistemic humility and just humility in general, and can help us actually gain a bit more empathy for other people and how they see the world and how they see reality. It can put us in somebody else's shoes quite nicely.
But it might still not answer the question, what is knowledge?
What is knowledge, yeah.
It answers the question, what do people perceive knowledge to be?
Yeah, and it also doesn't quite answer what the self is, but it can tell us how the self becomes constructed.
That makes sense. Yeah, there's a lot in it that it is basically a descriptive look at everything. And a descriptive look at things doesn't necessarily mean it's wrong. It just means that it's not necessarily the whole picture. Yeah, especially exactly. When we know what we know about our perceptions not actually being the whole picture.
Yeah. And it can help us to understand that, our picture isn't the whole picture. Just by thinking about how everything works and looking at things through social constructionism. It can also kind of help us to understand determinism a little better, especially when we think of the construction of the self through the social environment.
Now, when you're talking about determinism there, are you talking about hard
Not necessarily hard determinism, but just more sort of how everything is determines how we are.
Right, yeah. So if everything is socially constructed, then everything we are is socially constructed, and then everything that will be is socially constructed, and therefore everything is deterministic in that light.
In that sense, yeah. And sort of like the argument, where you're born determines what religion you'll be. So
yeah. And I mean, that is a big part of it. I mean, where you're born, or at least the parents you are born to, very much does determine the religion you'll be, at least initially.
Yeah, maybe not now, but like you say, initially, there is that sense of it being socially constructed. So it can help us understand those kind of things. Don't adopt it as a theory of knowledge, but adopt it to help you understand knowledge that little bit better. How people use the term knowledge, how people see knowledge, how people construct their reality of the world. There's many things that it can be used for to help understand reality that little bit better.
Yeah, but not necessarily give a full overview.
A determined answer, yeah.
Yeah, it gives a 2D picture to a 3D reality, perhaps. And Ben actually says, determinism here, social constructivism gives account for the intersection of various influences upon the self and explains how it manifests of these competing influences.
Yep, one good example. One good example is should the medical things in a society, so hospitals and medical care and all that kind of thing, should they be socialized or should they be privatized? In the UK, most people are going to argue, well, the NHS is brilliant. You shouldn't have to pay for medical treatment. Your medications, if you need them to survive, should be given to you. In America, they're going to argue that, well, no, insulin should cost $900, and you should be paying $10,000 to give birth. If you don't want to pay that money, don't. Socialism is bad. It leads to death panels. So the environment you exist in constructs how you view something like that, and all these competing influences.
Yeah, it's it's a very good take on how much that we are influenced by our environments, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it can really demonstrate how there is this heavy influence from our environment to everything else. And again, this is why it seems to be, like you've been saying all along, Dave, it can be something that can really help explain why things are the way they are. It just doesn't necessarily give us a clear view of the way things ought to be, or the things the way are outside of our perceptions.
Yeah, exactly. Well put.
Is there anything else that you feel that we need to cover off tonight?
No, I think that basically gives a nice introduction into how what social constructionism is, how we might apply it, how we might use it to think about how we look at the world and that kind of thing. The only thing I could probably suggest now is there's a great introductory book called The Social Construction of Reality by Peter Berger and Thomas Luckman.
I really want a burger.
Yeah, and some luck, But yeah, that's a great introduction, and it discusses all these things, and it discusses how something that begins as subjective can become an objective part of our reality.
Yeah.
Which a lot of people kind of don't quite get.
No, that's true. I mean, something Randolph says here is reality just is. And whilst I'd agree with you, reality just is, part of what we've discussed is, as humans, we don't actually perceive what reality is. And it's something that neuroscience has recently, proven the philosophical thought on, is the fact that we don't perceive the whole of reality. It's all filtered by our brain. So when you say reality just is, yes, you are correct, but we don't necessarily know what reality actually is. We have our perceptions, which can form different constructions, and that's why there is this sort of social constructivist view on things. And it's why we've turned around and said, it definitely describes certain things quite well, or gives us an insight into certain things. It just doesn't give us the full picture. And Luke turns around and says, I think some things are definitely socially constructed. Reality as a whole is not.
I agree. Our perception of reality might be socially constructed, but reality itself isn't. There seems to be this, like, going back to the idea of idealism and everything being mental constructs. To some degree, that's true, but the mental constructs are about something. They have intentionality. They're towards something, and that something that they're towards, it could be considered reality. But just to go back to Randall's point, because, you know, I like to be a pain in the ass.
And you do
if
it well.
reality, I do. If reality just is, then is atheism polysemous? Does it only have one definition? Is atheism the lack of belief in God? Is it not believing in God? Is it the belief God does not exist? If it just is, then one of those must be reality. If otherwise, reality is partially socially constructed. It isn't just is, it is how we see it.
Very good take. And as Alan has just chimed in and said, the map is not the territory. Which, yeah. I mean, that can be a very simplistic way to actually look at social constructivism and the way maps are created. Maps are quite not accurate from an actuality point of view. I mean, they're taking a 3D concept and making it 2D in the first place, which is hard enough to do, and then they're trying to give you a basic overview of this is here, this is here, this is here. But that's a close approximation. And as we've already said, it's already turning something 3D into something 2D to try and, yeah, so it's a good one. Well said. Randolph says, I thought you were drunk. Yeah, he is. You should see what he's like when he's sober. He's a right cunt. Icarus says, atheism just is. Yeah, I mean, it's the default position, man, clearly.
It's the null hypothesis.
I've actually started writing an article on and doing a short on forming a hypothesis, because my short on the null hypothesis was critiqued today, which, well, the critique was it doesn't describe how to form a hypothesis. It's like, well, no, it's assumed that if you have got to the point where you're claiming a null hypothesis, you understand how to get to a hypothesis. But okay, fair enough. I'll take that critique, and I will do my best to provide a view on that. And the way I'm going with it is a little bit simple and a little bit weird. So it's basically me, and hopefully it will be short enough. Again, me, to get people at least somewhat interested in the topic. Not me. So that one will be coming out when I finally get around to finishing it, and I'll actually have a discussion with a couple of people who know their science a bit more than me, such as Luke and Steen. You're going to be my peer review, and I know it's a small peer review, but then, you know, we don't have that many viewers anyway, so it doesn't need to be a big peer review. And Dave, next Tuesday we've got a stream on fictional truth and non-fictional falsehood, haven't we?
Yeah, and that should be quite a fun stream. Like, let's think of something like Terry Pratchett. Okay, his books are fantastic.
They definitely are.
Yeah, they're all fictional, but there is truth in them, like truths about the human condition, truths about how we see the world, truths about how we should see morality. Think of his take on moral fictionalism.
Yep.
So is something fictional because it's all made up? Well, then Terry Pratchett's books can't be fictional. And it means the Bible can't be fictional because some of it's not made up. And now think about something like a book of phrenology. Originally, that wasn't fiction. It's all full of falsehoods, but it was nonfiction. So is nonfiction something that tells nothing but the truth? Well, that can't seem to be the case. So we can have truths in fictions, and we can have non-truths in nonfictions. So what is fiction, and what is nonfiction?
And what is a falsehood, and what is a lie as well?
And what is a lie, yeah.
So that's going to be next Tuesday for everyone. And next Thursday, we're thinking about doing some philosopher games. And we're thinking about opening up the stream because we haven't done an end of month free for all in ages. And today is technically the end of month. So it's going to sort of be a beginning Thursday of the month that isn't the first Thursday. So the second Thursday of the month, whatever. It's a free-for-all where we're going to invite people on to play some philosopher games with us and see what our results are and just have a bit of a general chat. Way less formal than normal. So it's definitely bring your own beer, wine, whiskey, whatever. Join us on stream and have a laugh. You don't have to have a webcam. It would be good if you at least had a mic though, otherwise you'd just be joining us. And what we'll do is we'll send out a link in the chat. So that's next Thursday. So Tuesday we've got fictional truth and non-fictional falsehoods, and Thursday we've got some philosophy games going on. We haven't thought of a title for that one or booked it in, but that's what's going to be happening next Thursday unless something happens between now and then. I'm really looking forward to that one. Not just because we're going to be playing games, but because it's been a while since we've had a massive group of you on the stream with us, and I really like that sort of thing. It's as much as I like these direct streams, it's great to have you all here with us. And plus, having all of you talk, it means I get more time to drink. So that's always a benefit. Although I need to do my best not to stay up till like 4 or 5 in the morning again, because I'll be back at work next week.
Yeah, I definitely won't be staying up that late.
No. Dave, I'm going to rely on you to tell me to go to bed when it's that time. And if I tell you to fuck off, you just need to take over the stream and cut it off so I don't know what's going on.
My hacker days are behind me.
Yeah, but you've got access to the Answers and Reason account. You can literally just jump in. You've also got access to the Restream account. You can do it all.
Okay. I have the power.
Yeah, I'm cutting you off, Joe, quite literally. It might be needed.
I used to be a drug dealer. I'm not good at cutting people off.
So you're an enabler.
Yep.
But brilliant. So tonight's stream's obviously been on constructing reality, social constructivism, and it's shown that, or at least our discussion and the way we've gone with things, our general beliefs on the topic is it just definitely describes part of reality and the way things seem to work, but it doesn't seem to describe a whole depiction of knowledge and truth and those sorts of things. It seems to be a descriptive take on knowledge, much in the way that moral relativism, moral subjectivism seems to be a descriptive take on morality. So there we are. We're at the end of tonight, and I really have enjoyed tonight, and I really thank all of you who have joined us. But before we go, there is something I would very much like to say, and that is make sure, if you haven't already, check out Luke's site, Don't Believe Your Eyes. It streamed yesterday. That was Monday, the 30th of May, and it was on eyewitness testimony, and it was really good. And honestly, check out the bi-weekly sight streams. It was really good. Have a good night, all.
Night all.